My name is Delilah Moore. I'm 31 years old, and everyone in my family laughed at my father's coin collection until they learned what it was really worth. Growing up, I used to sit on the living room carpet with my dad every Sunday afternoon. He'd open this small oak chest with brass hinges, pull out a few velvet trays, and show me pieces of metal that, to me at the time, looked completely ordinary. Quarters, dimes, some dull copper coins that didn't even shine anymore. I didn't understand why he'd spend hours inspecting them under a magnifying glass or writing tiny notes about mint marks and historical context. But I loved those afternoons anyway. My father, Edward Moore, wasn't the kind of man who showed affection through big gestures. He was quiet, thoughtful, a high school history teacher who preferred books and jazz records to parties. The way he showed love was through patience, teaching me, explaining, listening. The coins were his language, and every time he handed me one and said, "Look closer, sweetheart, history lives in small things," it felt like he was giving me a secret. My mother, Ruth, never understood that. To her, his collection was just junk in boxes. She hated how much time he spent cataloging and cleaning. My older brother, Grant, used to joke that Dad was collecting retirement money that no one would ever want. My younger sister, Lydia, would roll her eyes and say, "You two are adorable with your little coins." It never stopped my father. And it never stopped me from sitting beside him. When he passed away suddenly 3 years ago, a heart attack while grading papers, the house felt like it had lost its heartbeat. The silence after the funeral was suffocating. Everyone grieved in their own way, but for me, grief felt like standing in an empty room that still smelled like him. A week after the funeral, we gathered at the family home to divide his belongings. That's when the real ugliness began. My mother, tired and bitter, moved through the house like a foreman at a warehouse. "Grant, take the furniture. Lydia, the paintings. Delilah, you can have whatever you want from the office, I suppose." Her tone made it sound like she was offering me scraps. In the corner of that office sat the oak chest, the one I knew as well as I knew my own heartbeat. It was tucked beneath his desk, still locked. My father had once let me hold the key when I was little, and I remembered exactly where he kept it inside the drawer, taped under the top edge. I retrieved it, hands trembling slightly. The metal was cool against my skin. When I opened the chest, the smell hit me instantly. Aged paper, old leather, and something faintly metallic. My throat tightened. There they were. The coins, neatly labeled in plastic sleeves, grouped by century, by mint, by country. His handwriting, slanted and deliberate, was still on the tiny index cards that accompanied each one. Grant leaned against the doorframe, smirking. "You really want that, Dad's play money?" I didn't look up. "Yes, that's all I want." He laughed. "You could at least pick something useful. Something with actual value." My mother sighed behind him. "Delilah, that's clutter. You don't need to burden yourself with more of his nonsense." Her words stung, but I didn't argue. Instead, I closed the chest gently and carried it out of the room. It wasn't heavy, maybe 30 pounds, but it felt like carrying the last piece of him I'd ever have. As I loaded it into my car, Lydia called out, "Hey! At least you won't go broke. Maybe you can buy a coffee with all those nickels." They all laughed. I didn't. That night, back in my apartment, I placed the chest in the corner of my bedroom, right under the window. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it again, letting my fingers trace the rows of old coins. I didn't care what they were worth. To me, each one was a story my father had once told. There was the Roman denarius he'd shown me when I was 10, saying, "A soldier probably held this once." The tarnished silver dime from 1916 that he'd called a rebel survivor. And the gold coin from 1933 that he'd kept separate, wrapped in soft cloth, saying only, "Someday you'll understand this one." I never did, not then, at least. Over time, life moved on. My siblings flaunted new cars, my mother went on cruises, and I went back to my quiet, steady life as an administrative assistant. Every now and then, I'd hear them joke about Delilah and her magical money chest. I'd just smile and change the subject. I didn't need them to understand. On quiet nights, I'd take the coins out and line them up on my table, I'd hear my father's voice in the back of my mind, explaining how each piece told the story of its time, how currency was the language of civilization. History, he'd said, isn't always written in books. Sometimes, it's stamped in metal. I didn't realize how true that was until years later. Sometimes I wondered what he'd think if he saw how the family had turned out, how quickly love fades when there's nothing left to take. My mother grew colder, Grant more arrogant, Lydia more careless. And me? I just got quieter. People assume grief fades, but really, it changes shape. It becomes something you carry, quietly, in your chest. The coin chest became that for me, my small way of keeping him alive. Still, I couldn't help but notice the irony. The same family who mocked him for years would probably rush to sell his collection if they knew what it meant. And in a way, I was right. Looking back now, I see that moment the day I chose to keep that chest as the turning point in my life. It didn't look like one then. It just looked like a woman holding on to the last thing she loved. But that choice would later reveal everything about my family, their greed, their envy, their hypocrisy. And it would reveal something about me, too. That I was stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. Back then, though, I didn't see it as strength. I saw it as loyalty, love, maybe even denial. I was just a daughter holding tight to her father's memory, defending it against a world too shallow to see its worth. But as I closed the chest that night, feeling its weight settle deep into the wooden floor, a quiet thought crossed my mind, one I didn't speak aloud. One day, they'll see what he saw. I didn't know when. I didn't know how, but somehow, I believed it. And years later, standing in front of an appraiser who would look at those same coins with awe instead of ridicule, I realized that belief was the one inheritance my father truly meant for me to have. They laughed at my father's useless coins, but those coins would one day silence every cruel word they ever said. They say grief makes people show who they really are, and after my father died, I saw my family's true faces clearer than ever before. The week after the funeral, our house, his house, didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a showroom being picked apart piece by piece. The air was stale with the scent of dust and old wood polish. The walls still held his framed maps and vintage posters, but my mother had already started marking items with sticky notes. Grant dining set, Lydia paintings, Delilah office miscellaneous. That last one made my stomach turn. Miscellaneous. That was what my father's memory had become to her, something to file away and forget. I stood in the doorway of his study, staring at the familiar mess he'd always kept a chaos only he understood. Stacks of books, piles of paper, tiny labeled boxes of coins. It looked exactly as he'd left it. I could almost imagine him sitting there, reading by the yellow lamplight, his glasses slipping down his nose as he muttered about history's forgotten details. But my mother's voice cut through that memory like a blade. "Delilah, can you come help with the attic boxes?" Her tone was sharp, impatient, as if she were dealing with a distant relative rather than her daughter. I swallowed hard and walked into the hallway. "Can we maybe slow down a little? I don't think we need to rush through everything." "Sweetheart," she said, the word dripping with irritation, "we can't live in the past. The sooner we get this done, the better for everyone." Grant, who was hauling a stack of books, chimed in. "Yeah, Dee, Dad's gone. You can't just keep everything forever. We all have lives to get back to." His words felt like a slap. I wanted to scream that my life was the one my father had actually been part of. They'd barely visited him unless they needed something: money, advice, sympathy. But I stayed silent. That was my curse back then, always staying silent. When they finally reached the study, Grant ran his hand along the shelves and whistled. "Man, look at all this junk. We could have had a garage sale and made a fortune in quarters." Lydia laughed. "You're terrible, Grant. But honestly, it's true. Dad collected so much random stuff." "He didn't collect random stuff," I said, sharper than I intended. "He collected history." Lydia rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Delilah. You always romanticize everything he did. You can't even tell me what half these coins are worth." "I don't have to. They meant something to him," Grant smirked. "Well, if you're taking them, you better dust them. They're just taking up space." And with that, they moved on like vultures circling what they wanted next. I waited until their footsteps faded down the hall before walking to the small oak chest tucked beneath his desk, the same one I'd taken home after the funeral. I ran my fingers over the brass latches, feeling the familiar grooves. But then something caught my eye. Beside the chest was a small leather notebook I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked between a stack of papers, as if deliberately hidden. I pulled it out carefully. Inside were pages filled with his neat, looping handwriting catalog numbers, dates, and little notes in the margins. Some entries even had stars beside them. 1933, double eagle, hold, never sell. Roman denarius AD, 211. For Delilah. She listens. My heart twisted. She listens. He had written that for me. I closed the notebook, holding it to my chest. I didn't care about what was written inside anymore. Just those 2 words. That evening, while my siblings argued downstairs about furniture and inheritance, I quietly packed up the rest of his study. His fountain pen, his glasses case, his journals, his old coin catalogs, everything that smelled like him. I knew I couldn't save it all, but I could save what mattered. When I came down with the boxes, my mother looked up from her spot at the dining table. "What are you doing with those?" "I'm taking them home," I said simply. Grant frowned. "You can't take all that stuff, Dee. Some of it might be valuable. We should split it." I tightened my grip on the boxes. "You've already taken everything else. This is mine." He laughed. "What, Dad's old paperwork and pocket change? Knock yourself out." That was the thing about Grant, he only valued what sparkled. "Fine," my mother said, exhaling loudly. "If that's what you want, take it. Just don't expect anyone to help you move it. We have enough to deal with." I didn't ask for help. I loaded the boxes into my car one by one, the night air cold against my cheeks. Every time I turned back to the house, it looked smaller, emptier, like a hollow version of the home I'd grown up in. The porch light flickered as I closed the trunk, and I realized something. I wasn't just taking his things. I was taking what was left of him. Back in my apartment, I arranged the items carefully on my shelves. The oak chest went beneath the window, just like before. I set the notebook beside it, as if the two belonged together. Then, for the first time since the funeral, I let myself cry. Not just because I missed him, but because I hated how quickly everyone else had moved on. How easily they'd turned his legacy into a joke, his belongings into bargaining chips. A few days later, I stopped by the family house to drop off some mail for my mother. When I walked inside, I barely recognized it. The furniture was gone, the walls bare. It smelled like cleaning supplies and emptiness. My mother stood in the kitchen, folding dish towels. "You're just in time," she said. "Grant and Lydia are coming to help me put the house on the market." I froze. "You're selling it already?" "Of course," she said flatly. "There's no reason to hold on to an empty house. It's too big for me." "It was Dad's," I whispered. She looked at me, eyes cold. "It's just wood and nails, Delilah. He's gone." I wanted to shout that she was wrong, that the walls still held his voice, that the air still smelled like him, but I didn't. I just nodded, turned around, and left. That night, I sat beside the coin chest again, running my fingers over the lid. "They took everything you loved, Dad," I whispered. "Everything but this." I knew he'd never wanted his collection for money. It was about preservation, about memory. And now, it was all I had left to preserve him. When I opened the chest that night, moonlight glinted off the coins like tiny stars. For a moment, it almost felt like he was there beside me again, humming his favorite jazz tune under his breath. And as I looked at those useless coins, I made myself a quiet promise. No matter what happens, I'll protect them. I'll protect you. I didn't know yet how much that promise would cost me or how it would one day turn my whole family against me. They'd taken everything my father loved, except the one thing that would later destroy their greed. People say time heals all wounds, but time didn't heal mine, it just made the pain quieter, easier to ignore until the next blow landed. 3 years passed after my father's death, and life had turned from survival into slow suffocation, the kind where every morning starts with a sigh before you even get out of bed. I was 31, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment that cost more than it should have. My job as an office administrator barely covered rent and bills, and after a corporate restructuring, I found myself unemployed with a stack of late notices that kept multiplying like weeds. That's when the desperation began. My savings disappeared within months. Then went the emergency fund I'd built so carefully. By the time summer arrived, I was choosing between groceries and utilities. My phone buzzed daily with debt collection calls. And through it all, sitting silently in the corner of my bedroom, was the oak coin chest. I'd dust it occasionally, sometimes open it when the loneliness got too heavy. The coins always calmed me, the weight of them, the smell of old metal, the faint reflection of my father's hands in my memory. But that comfort started to twist into guilt. Every time I opened another bill, I couldn't help but glance at the chest and wonder, am I being foolish? My siblings thought so. Grant had started his own real estate business, and Lydia was working as a dental hygienist. They loved to remind me how unlucky I was. I'd stopped attending family dinners to avoid the pitying looks and snide remarks. Then one evening, as I sat hunched over my kitchen table surrounded by unopened envelopes, my phone buzzed with a message from Lydia. Lydia, hey Dee, heard you lost your job. You okay? Me, I'll manage. Just figuring things out. Lydia, you could always sell Dad's coins. Seriously, you've been holding on to that junk forever. It might help you out. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Me. They're not junk. Her response came fast. Lydia. You know what I mean. Nostalgia doesn't pay bills. Just trying to help. Help. That word again. From the same people who'd taken everything my father loved. I didn't reply. But her words stuck in my mind. That night, as I lay awake listening to the hum of my refrigerator, my eyes drifted toward the chest again. Was she right? Was I clinging to memories when what I needed was money? The next morning, I finally decided to take a closer look. I pulled the chest into the middle of the living room, knelt on the floor, and lifted the lid. Inside were the velvet trays, perfectly preserved, each coin wrapped and labeled in my father's careful handwriting. 1909, Lincoln penny first mint year. 1877 Indian head worn but original. 1933 Double Eagle private hold. I remembered the small leather notebook too, tucked between the trays. Flipping through it now, I noticed details I hadn't paid attention to before: notations, star marks, and even shorthand I didn't understand. One entry caught my eye: Morgan silver dollar error strike. Potential. Out of curiosity, I took that coin and looked it up online. The search results stunned me. Images of identical coins appeared on my screen, with prices that made my heart skip. One auction listing showed a similar coin sold for $4,600. I blinked, convinced I'd misread it. I checked again. The value was real. Hands shaking, I pulled out another and $1,804 draped bust dollar, one of the oldest coins in the box. I typed it into the search bar, hit enter, and froze. Estimated auction value: hundreds of thousands. My mouth went dry. It couldn't be real. Could it? I sat back on the floor, my pulse pounding. The coins that my family mocked for years, the ones they called useless metal, might actually be worth more than anything they owned. For a moment, I laughed. Not a happy laugh, but one of disbelief. Then came the fear. What if it was true? What if I really was sitting on a fortune? And if so, what would my family do if they found out? I closed the chest and locked it immediately, hiding it in my closet behind old suitcases. But my curiosity had already taken hold. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I emailed a local antique shop about appraisals. Their website said they handled estate items, including coins and collectibles. The next morning, I received a polite reply: We'd be happy to take a look. Please bring your items in at your convenience. Appointments recommended. It felt too formal, too serious, but I booked one anyway for the following Tuesday. In the days leading up to it, I couldn't focus on anything else. I started imagining wild scenarios. Maybe the coins were worthless, or maybe they'd change my life forever. I felt guilty even thinking about the money, as if I was betraying my father's memory by assigning a price tag to what he loved. But I also couldn't ignore the truth. I was broke, and he wouldn't have wanted me to starve out of sentimentality. Still, part of me hoped they'd be worth nothing. That would make everything simpler. On Monday night, I called my mother, more out of habit than intention. She answered with that familiar tone, half annoyance, half indifference. "Delilah, you sound tired." "I'm fine, Mom, just busy. How are you?" "Oh, you know. Grant's helping me with some renovations. Lydia's coming by this weekend. You should drop in." I hesitated. "Maybe another time." A pause. Then her sigh. "You can't keep isolating yourself, dear. It's not healthy." "I'm not isolating," I said quietly. "I'm just keeping peace." "Peace," she repeated, a note of disdain in her voice. "You always did have a dramatic streak." Before I could respond, she added, "You still have that coin box, don't you? Honestly, Delilah, you should sell it. It's been sitting there collecting dust. At least make something useful out of it." There it was again, the complete lack of respect for the one thing that connected me to my father. "I'll think about it," I said flatly. Then hung up. But after I hung up, I stared at the chest again, sitting quietly in the corner. It hit me how strange life was. Something they'd all dismissed, something they'd treated as a joke, was the only thing keeping me afloat now. I took out one coin, just one, and held it up under the lamp. The light caught its edges perfectly, revealing intricate designs I'd never really noticed before. My father's voice echoed in my mind. "Look closer, sweetheart. History lives in small things." He'd been right, and tomorrow, I'd find out just how much history he'd left behind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining the appraiser's face, pitying, amused, maybe even impressed. But deep down, I sensed that something big was coming. Something that would not only change my life but also reveal who my family truly was. I thought I was going to the appraiser to check sentimental value, but what I was really about to uncover was the price of everyone's greed. When I walked into the appraisal office, I half expected them to laugh at me too. It was a small antique store on the corner of Hawthorne and Maple, one of those cozy places that smelled like dust, old books, and polished wood. The bell above the door chimed softly as I stepped inside, clutching my father's coin chest like it was a fragile secret. Behind the counter stood an older man with silver hair and round glasses. His name tag read Calvin Rhodes, Senior Appraiser. He looked up from a magnifying loupe and smiled politely. "Good morning. How can I help you?" I swallowed hard. "Hi, I have some coins that belong to my father. I just wanted to know if they're worth anything." He motioned toward a table near the window. "You came to the right place. Please, have a seat." My hands trembled as I set the oak chest down. It looked small and unassuming against the polished surface. I felt a strange mix of guilt and hope swirling inside me. Guilt for putting a price on something that had meant everything to my father, and hope that maybe, just maybe, it could save me. Rhodes adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Let's take a look, shall we?" I opened the chest carefully, lifting the first velvet tray into the light. The morning sun spilled across the table, catching the faint glimmer of old metal. "These were my dad's," I said softly. "He was a history teacher. Collecting was his hobby." Mr. Rhodes nodded approvingly. "A fine hobby, that one. May I?" I nodded, and he picked up one of the coins with delicate tweezers. For a moment, his expression was neutral, professional. Then, as he turned it under the light, something shifted in his face. His eyes narrowed slightly, his brow furrowed, and his mouth parted in quiet surprise. He set the coin down and picked up another, then another. Each time, his movements grew slower, more deliberate. Finally, he said quietly, "Where did your father get these?" I blinked. I'm not sure. He collected for years. Some he bought at flea markets, others through dealers or auctions, I think. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he called over a younger woman from the back room. Maria, could you bring me the 1800s reference catalog, please? She appeared a moment later with a thick binder and set it beside him. I watched as they began flipping through pages, comparing photos, examining mint marks. They murmured softly to each other, their voices low but tense. My stomach twisted. Is something wrong? Mister. Rhodes looked up, removing his glasses slowly. No, Miss Moore. Quite the opposite. He pointed to one of the coins, an old silver, a piece with a faint crack along its edge. Do you know what this is? I shook my head. No, I was never really into collecting. My dad tried to teach me, but... He smiled faintly. This is an 1,804 draped bust dollar, extremely rare. Most known examples are in museums. I blinked, not fully understanding. Is that... good? Good? He chuckled softly, then leaned back in his chair. Miss Moore, this coin alone could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. Hundreds of thousands? He nodded. At minimum. I just stared at him. My heart began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He picked up another coin. This one golden. Faintly tarnished. And this is a 1,933 double eagle. Do you have any idea how rare this is? I swallowed. My dad said it was special. He told me to never sell it. He was right. Mr. Rhodes's voice softened. Most of these were melted down by the government. The few that remain are among the most valuable coins in existence. I can't give an exact figure without a full appraisal, but... He paused, looking at me over his glasses. You might be sitting on a fortune, Miss Moore. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. A fortune? He nodded slowly. Your father must have known exactly what he was doing. This collection is remarkable not just for its condition, but for its history. Some of these coins have provenance dating back to the early 1800s. They're not just collectibles, they're artifacts. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All those years my family had mocked me for holding on to this chest. All those dinners where they'd snickered about his junk coins. And now, here I was, sitting across from an expert who looked at them like they were the crown jewels. I don't understand, I whispered. He never said anything about them being valuable. He just said they were special. Mr. Rhodes smiled gently. That's how collectors like your father think. For them, the history always matters more than the price tag. But make no mistake, Miss Moore, these are extraordinary. I sat there in silence, my mind spinning. Rent, debt, bills. All of it could vanish with a single sale. And yet, the idea of parting with them made my chest ache. Mr. Rhodes seemed to sense my conflict. If I may offer some advice, he said softly, don't rush into any decisions. Collections like this deserve proper care. I can connect you with a specialist for insurance and preservation. And if you ever choose to sell, do it through a reputable auction house. Never privately. Okay, I murmured, still dazed. He hesitated. Then added, and one more thing. Rare collections attract attention, sometimes the wrong kind. That last line made something in me tighten. You mean thieves? Sometimes thieves, he said carefully. Sometimes just people with opinions about what's fair. I thought of my mother, my brother, my sister, their laughter, their entitlement, their greed. I nodded slowly. I understand. Mr. Rhodes smiled kindly. You've inherited something precious, not just in money, but in meaning. Your father must have trusted you deeply. For a moment, emotion caught in my throat. He did, I whispered. I think he always knew I'd protect it. When I left the shop, the sunlight outside felt different, brighter somehow, but heavier too. I stood on the sidewalk clutching the chest. the wind tugging at my hair. The world suddenly looked sharper, louder. I kept replaying Mr. Rhodes's words. A fortune. Extraordinary. Don't tell anyone. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed a text from Lydia. Lydia, hey sis, haven't heard from you in a bit. Everything okay? For a moment, I considered replying. But something in me hesitated. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was instinct. I locked my phone and slid it into my pocket. When I got home, I set the chest back in its corner, exactly where it had always been. But it didn't feel like the same box anymore. It wasn't just a keepsake now, it was a secret, a dangerous one. I sat on the floor beside it, running my fingers over the lid. My father's voice echoed faintly in my memory. Look closer, sweetheart. History lives in small things. He'd been right, again. History lived in those coins, and so did power. I thought about all the years of ridicule, all the times they'd laughed at me. They wouldn't be laughing for long. The appraiser's voice still echoed in my mind as I whispered to myself, they'll never know what's hidden in this box, until it's too late. Delilah, Mr. Rhodes had said, his voice calm but deliberate, this isn't just a coin collection, it's a museum in a box. Those words followed me home like a haunting melody I couldn't stop hearing. I sat on my living room floor that night with the oak chest in front of me. The same chest I'd once seen as a symbol of grief. Now it pulsed with a strange kind of energy, half wonder, half fear. A fortune. That's what he'd said. I tried to wrap my mind around it, but it didn't feel real. I was still the same woman who couldn't pay her rent 2 weeks ago, still eating dollar store pasta for dinner, still avoiding calls from creditors. And now, I was apparently the owner of a collection worth more than $1 million. The absurdity of it made me laugh, an unsteady, nervous laugh that quickly turned into tears. I wasn't crying over the money. I was crying over him, my father. He'd spent decades building this collection, probably knowing exactly what it was worth. And yet, he'd never sold a single piece. He never flaunted it, never even hinted at its value. Why? Because to him, it wasn't about the fortune. It was about the story. That realization hit me hard. My father had always said, true worth isn't what people will pay, it's what people will remember. I used to think that was one of his sentimental teacher quotes, but now it felt like a message. Maybe he'd known this day would come, that I'd need something to remind me that value doesn't always look like wealth. But there I was, staring at the literal definition of wealth, sitting on my living room floor. I wiped my eyes, exhaled shakily, and started pulling out the trays one by one. The labels were so neat, each card written in his careful handwriting, every word purposeful. 1,799 draped bus dollar, exceptional strike. 1,861 Confederate cent, rare issue. 1,933 double eagle, keep secure. That last one caught my eye again, the golden coin he'd kept separately, wrapped in its own piece of velvet. I held it up under the lamp, the faintest glow radiating from it like a secret whispering through time. It didn't even look like something that could change a person's life. It was small, smooth, and warm from my touch. And yet, according to Mr. Rhodes, it could be worth hundreds of thousands, maybe even more. I placed it back carefully, my hands trembling. My phone buzzed on the couch, startling me. I reached for it, half expecting Lydia's name to appear again. But it was just a notification from my banking app, another overdraft warning. I sighed. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I was rich and broke at the same time. That night, I barely slept. My mind spun with possibilities. Should I sell one coin? Just one enough to pay off my debts and breathe again? Mr. Rhodes had warned me not to rush. But what did he know about desperation? By dawn, I had convinced myself to at least explore the idea. I made coffee, sat at my laptop, and started researching auction houses. The more I read, the more overwhelmed I felt. The process was complicated. Authentication, insurance, provenance, legal, documentation. It wasn't something you could just walk in and do. Still, part of me thrilled at the idea. My father's quiet obsession had turned into something powerful, something mine. I opened his old leather notebook again, flipping through the pages. There were small annotations I'd missed before, tiny scribbles beside certain coins. Not ready. Hold until Delilah understands. Legacy is greater than value. That last one broke me. He'd known me so well. He'd known how sentimental I was, how easily I let emotion cloud practicality. Maybe that's why he never told anyone else about the collection's worth. He trusted me to protect it, not profit from it. And yet, protection and survival are two very different things. As the morning light filled the room, I made myself a quiet promise. I would honor his legacy, but I would also save myself. I decided to start by getting the coins insured. Mr. Rhodes had mentioned a contact who handled rare collections, so I called him. His name was Aaron Wells, a specialist in antique appraisals. His voice on the phone was calm, professional, but there was an unmistakable interest when I mentioned the 1933 Double Eagle. "Miss Moore," he said, "you understand that specific coin is among the most controversial in U.S. history, right?" "I read something about that," I replied cautiously. "Some were destroyed?" "Exactly. The government melted nearly all of them down after the Gold Reserve Act. Only a handful survived, and they're extraordinarily valuable. One sold for over $7 million a few years ago." I nearly dropped the phone. "$7 million?" He chuckled. "Yes, you're holding a piece of forbidden history." That phrase, forbidden history, made my skin prickle. He offered to authenticate the collection officially, suggesting I bring it to a secure facility. "It'll give you legal documentation and insurance coverage. Without that, you're vulnerable." Vulnerable. The word made me uneasy. Vulnerable to what? To thieves? To collectors? Or worse, to my own family? I scheduled an appointment for the following week, hung up, and sat back on the couch, my heart pounding. For the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be both rich and afraid. That evening I called Mr. Rhodes to thank him again. "You were right," I told him. "They're worth more than I ever imagined." He chuckled softly. "Your father had a keen eye. Not many collectors are that meticulous." "You're very lucky, Miss Moore." "I feel lucky," I admitted. "But I also feel scared." "That's natural," he said kindly. "Great responsibility often follows great inheritance. Just remember, greed will circle you now. Be careful who you trust." His words lingered long after I hung up. I stared at the coin chest again. The very thing that had once connected me to my father was now a magnet for danger. I moved it that night. I didn't want to keep it in the apartment anymore. I packed it into a plain storage box, drove across town, and rented a small climate-controlled unit. When I handed the keys to the manager, my fingers hesitated before letting go. Driving home, the silence in my car felt heavy. I'd done the smart thing, but my chest ached, like I'd just buried my father all over again. That night, I dreamed of him sitting at his desk, the oak chest open before him, his voice soft but serious. "It's not about the coins, Delilah. It's about knowing what to hold and when to let go." When I woke up, I didn't know which one I was supposed to do. All I knew was that everything had changed. The world thought I was a quiet, broke woman clinging to her father's memory. But hidden in a storage unit across town sat proof that my father had left me more than memories, he'd left me power. And though I didn't know it yet, that power would soon draw out the greed that had been sleeping in my family for years. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of control, fragile, but real. After moving my father's coin chest to a secure storage unit, the anxiety that had been clinging to me began to ease. It was as if I'd finally taken a deep breath after years of drowning. My apartment felt safer, quieter. I slept through the night without waking at every sound. But peace is deceptive. Sometimes it's just the quiet moment before everything falls apart. The week following the appraisal, I tried to settle back into some kind of routine. I polished my resume, applied for jobs, even forced myself to meet an old friend for coffee. On the surface, things looked normal. But beneath it all, I could feel the storm building. It began with small things, calls from unknown numbers, A few odd messages on social media from people claiming to be interested in collectibles. I didn't think much of it at first. Coin collecting was a tight-knit world, and word traveled fast when a new discovery surfaced. But I'd never mentioned my father's collection to anyone except Mr. Rhodes, and later Aaron Wells. So how did they know? One night, curiosity got the better of me. I typed "rare coin collection appraiser Hawthorne" into Google. My stomach dropped when I saw a local blog headline pop up. Rumor of historic coin collection surfaces in small-town appraisal. But the description was unmistakable: a 1933 double eagle possibly discovered in a private estate. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the comments. Collectors were already speculating, arguing about ownership laws, some even hinting at government involvement. And all I could think was, they're talking about me. That night, I barely slept. Every noise outside made me jump. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of strangers prying open the chest, their hands rifling through my father's legacy while I screamed and couldn't move. The next morning, I called Mr. Rhodes immediately. "Calvin, did you tell anyone about my father's collection?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He sounded taken aback. "Of course not. Confidentiality is part of my job." "Why do you ask?" I hesitated. "There's an article online. Someone mentioned a collection with a double eagle." There was a pause on his end. "That's unfortunate," he said finally. "Rumors spread quickly in this field. But don't panic, Miss Moore. Without your name or specific details, you're still anonymous." I wanted to believe him, but the unease wouldn't leave me. Later that afternoon, I decided to visit the storage unit, just to reassure myself. The facility was quiet, the air inside cool and dry. I unlocked my unit, stepped inside, and exhaled when I saw the oak chest sitting exactly where I'd left it untouched. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. That invisible eyes had found me. When I got back to my car, I noticed a missed call from Lydia. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity and maybe guilt made me call back. She answered immediately. "Delilah, you're alive." "Funny," I said. "What's up?" "Oh, nothing urgent," she said breezily. "I was just talking to Mom the other day and we were wondering how you're doing. Haven't seen you in forever." Her tone was sweet, too sweet. The same tone she used when she wanted something. "I'm fine," I said flatly. There was a brief silence. Then she asked casually, "You still have Dad's coin box, right?" My chest tightened. "Why?" "Oh, no reason," she said quickly. "Grant was joking about it last week. You know him. He said it's probably worth more as scrap metal than actual coins." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, that sounds like him." "Anyway," she continued, "if you ever decide to get rid of it, let me know. I've got a coworker who collects old currency. Could be fun to get it appraised." My pulse raced. "Already did," I said before I could stop myself. The silence that followed was deafening. "You did?" she said slowly. "When?" I swallowed. "A while ago. Just out of curiosity." Her voice dropped, laced with something sharp. "And?" "Nothing major," I lied. "Just sentimental stuff. Not worth much." She laughed softly, but I could hear the suspicion behind it. "Huh. I could have sworn I saw something online about a big find in town. Guess it's just a coincidence." I forced a smile she couldn't see. "Guess so." After we hung up, my hands were shaking. That was when I realized my biggest mistake. I'd underestimated them. My family might not have cared about the coins before, but the second they smelled money or even the possibility of it, they'd come for me. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that Lydia's call was just coincidence. But 2 days later, Grant called too. He didn't bother with small talk. "So, Lydia tells me you finally took Dad's coins to an appraiser." I froze. She misunderstood. "Don't lie, Delilah," he said smoothly. You've been obsessed with that box since Dad died. If you found out it's worth something, you owe us our share." "Owe you?" I repeated, stunned. "Dad left them to me." He laughed coldly. "Yeah, well, Dad didn't exactly leave a formal will, did he? That makes it family property." My heart pounded so hard it hurt. "You're wrong, Grant." "He did have a will. The coins were listed as my inheritance. You took the furniture and his car, this is mine." His tone changed instantly, darker now. "We'll see about that." And then he hung up. That night, fear wrapped itself around me like a second skin. Every sound in my apartment made me jump, the elevator ding, footsteps in the hall, the hum of the fridge. I knew what was coming. They'd mocked me when I was sentimental. But now that those coins meant my power, they'd stop at nothing to get them. I thought about calling Mr. Rhodes again, but what could he do? This wasn't about coins anymore. It was about greed. For the next few days, I stayed quiet. No posts online, no calls to family. I even changed my social media privacy settings. But the silence didn't bring peace this time, it brought tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. I started having the same nightmare over and over. I'd open my storage unit and find the chest gone, the space empty except for one coin lying on the floor, a reminder of everything I'd lost. And every time I woke from that dream, the same thought clawed at me. They know. One evening, I drove past the storage facility just to check. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, but deep down, I knew better. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw a dark sedan parked near the entrance. Its headlights flickered on briefly, then off again. My stomach turned cold. I didn't stop. I drove straight past and circled the block instead. Maybe it was nothing, a coincidence, like Lydia had said. Or maybe the storm had already started. When I got home, I locked every door and window, double-checking each one. Then I sat on the couch, staring into the darkness, listening to the silence. Peace was gone. In its place stood fear. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the panic, a spark of resolve began to burn. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. Because I'd spent years keeping my father's memory instead of fighting for it. But they were wrong. I wasn't the scared little sister anymore. I was my father's daughter. And the next time they came for his coins, they'd learn that the calm was over, and the storm was me. The knock came 3 days later. It was early afternoon, and I was still in my robe, sipping coffee while scrolling through job postings I didn't care about. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sudden thud, thud, thud against my door made me jump so hard that I nearly spilled my mug. For a second, I froze. My first thought was the landlord. My second worse was Grant. When the knocking came again, louder this time, I crept to the peephole. Sure enough, Grant's broad shoulders filled the hallway, and behind him stood Lydia, clutching her phone like it was a weapon. I exhaled slowly, bracing myself before unlocking the door just enough to speak. "What are you doing here?" Grant smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile people give when they're happy to see you. It was the one they give before a confrontation. "Relax, Dee. We just came to talk." "Talk about what?" I asked, though I already knew. He glanced at Lydia. "Can we come in?" "It's weird standing out here in the hallway." "I prefer weird to invaded," I said flatly. "Say what you need to say." Lydia rolled her eyes. "Delilah, stop being dramatic, we're family." I crossed my arms. Family doesn't show up unannounced after years of silence unless they want something. Her lips twitched, like she wanted to deny it but couldn't. "Fine," she said finally. "We want to see the coins." I stared at her, stunned by her bluntness. "You what?" Grant stepped forward, his tone hardening. "You heard her. We want to see Dad's collection. You've been hiding it for years, and we have a right to know what's in there." My heartbeat quickened, but I forced my voice to stay calm. "You don't have any rights to it. Dad left it to me." "That's what you say," Grant shot back. "But unless you can prove it, it's still part of the estate. We all deserve a share." Lydia jumped in, her voice trembling with barely restrained irritation. "It's not fair, Delilah. You always got special treatment. Dad babied you, and now you're hoarding everything like it's yours alone." My jaw tightened. I'm not hoarding anything, I'm protecting it. Because if I don't, you'll sell it off piece by piece for quick cash. Grant's smile vanished. You think you're better than us? No, I said. Just less greedy. That did it. His face darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might push past me. Instead, he took a deep breath and lowered his voice. Look, Dee, we're not here to fight. Just show us the box. Let's be reasonable. I stared at him, weighing his words. Reasonable wasn't a word my brother understood. He wasn't capable of curiosity without calculation. Still, I said, It's not here. Lydia's brow furrowed. What do you mean it's not here? I moved it. Her eyes widened. Where? I'm not telling you that. Grant's expression twisted into a smirk. You're lying. Believe what you want, I said quietly. But you're not getting near it. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. You think you can play games with us? We're not leaving until we see those coins. My hands began to tremble, but I refused to back down. Then you'll be standing there a long time. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Lydia shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. Grant, maybe we should. But before she could finish, he shoved past me, pushing the door open with his shoulder. Grant! I shouted, but he was already in the living room, scanning every surface like a predator. Where's the chest? He demanded, yanking open closets and drawers. Get out! I yelled, my voice cracking with fury. You can't just... Lydia tried to intervene, grabbing his arm. Grant, stop! You're making it worse. He shrugged her off. She's lying. I know it's here. I was shaking now, not from fear, but rage. You have no right to be here. Grant turned to me, his eyes cold. Everything Dad owned belongs to us too. You don't get to keep it all. Dad left it to me, I snapped. There was a will. Mr. Rhodes saw it. You just never cared enough to ask. For a split second, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then he sneered. Yeah, sure. Let me guess. No one else saw it? How convenient. Lydia's voice was smaller now. Grant, maybe she's telling the truth. He glared at her. You're siding with her now? I'm saying this is stupid, she snapped back. You're scaring her. They started arguing right there in my living room, shouting over each other, bringing up childhood resentments and old wounds that had nothing to do with coins. I stood there, watching them tear each other apart, feeling something inside me shift. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the peacemaker. But not anymore. Stop! I shouted, my voice sharp enough to silence them. They both turned toward me, startled. Get out! I said, my voice trembling but strong. Both of you. Delilah, Lydia started, but I cut her off. No, you don't get to walk in here and treat me like the enemy. You took everything else, Dad's furniture, his tools, even his paintings, and now you want this. Well, you can't have it. It's mine. Grant scoffed. We'll see what a lawyer says about that. I met his glare without blinking. Go ahead. But when you do, I'll make sure the world knows what kind of people you really are. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Lydia grabbed her bag and muttered. This was a mistake. She brushed past Grant, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. He lingered a moment longer, his jaw tight. You'll regret this, Delilah. I already regret letting you in. He stared at me for a second longer before storming out and slamming the door so hard that one of the picture frames rattled off the wall. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there shaking, my hands still clenched into fists. The apartment smelled faintly of cold air and tension. When I finally looked around, I realized how violated it felt, how small my home seemed after they'd been inside it. I sank to the floor, burying my face in my hands. They knew now. Maybe not everything, but enough. They'd smelled blood in the water, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. After a long moment, I stood, grabbed my phone, and called Mr. Rhodes. He answered on the second ring. Miss Moore? They came, I whispered. My brother and sister, They know something's up. They broke into my apartment looking for the coins. There was a long pause. Then his voice hardened. All right, listen to me carefully. From now on, you document everything. Calls, visits, messages, everything. And don't let them corner you again. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Okay. Do you still have the collection in secure storage? Yes. Good. Leave it there. Don't go back for a while. When we hung up, I felt a flicker of safety, but it was fleeting. I knew my family. Once greed got inside them, it didn't stop until it consumed everything in its path. I looked out my window at the fading daylight, my reflection faint against the glass. My father had always believed family was sacred. I wondered what he'd think now if he could see what they'd become, what we'd become. As the last bit of light disappeared, I whispered, I'm sorry, Dad. Because deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. They had arrived as family, but they were about to become something else entirely. My enemies. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around that year, I knew exactly what my family was capable of. The argument over the coins had cracked something between us, something that could never be repaired. After Grant and Lydia stormed out of my apartment, I didn't hear from them for weeks. The silence was blissful at first, a kind of fragile peace that let me breathe again. But I should have known it wouldn't last. Because silence in my family never meant surrender. It meant plotting. It started with a phone call from my mother. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind she used when she was pretending everything was fine. Delilah, darling, she said. I was thinking it's been ages since we've all been together. Why don't we have Thanksgiving at your place this year? My stomach dropped. At my place? Yes, it's more spacious than Lydia's apartment, and Grant's house is under renovation. Under renovation. I could practically hear the lie. Mom, I said slowly, that's not a good idea. Don't be ridiculous, she chirped. It's family. We need to talk things out, face to face. We can't keep avoiding each other. I wanted to say no. Every part of me screamed to say no. But something in her tone, the way she framed it as reconciliation, wore me down. Maybe a part of me still hoped that they could be decent. Maybe I still wanted my family back. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. The days leading up to Thanksgiving felt tense, like waiting for a storm you can't see but know is coming. I cleaned the apartment, cooked a modest dinner, and tried to convince myself it would be civil. I was wrong. They arrived an hour late, all together, which was unusual. Normally, Grant and Lydia couldn't stand each other long enough to share a car ride. That alone made my stomach twist. When I opened the door, Lydia was the first to step in. She smiled tightly and handed me a store-bought pumpkin pie. See? Peace offering. Grant followed behind her, his eyes scanning the room like he was assessing the square footage. Nice place, he said casually. Must be worth a lot in this market. And then my mother, Ruth, walked in, smiling like a queen entering her court. Oh, Delilah, you always keep things so tidy, she said. Your father would be proud. It was the first time she'd mentioned him without bitterness in years, and the falseness of it made my skin crawl. We sat down at the table. I'd made turkey, stuffing, and mashed potatoes simple, traditional. For a few blessed minutes, the small talk felt almost normal. Lydia complimented the food, Grant cracked a few jokes, and my mother reminisced about old holidays. But I should have known that normality in my family was always a prelude to something ugly. The first blow came halfway through dinner. So, Delilah, Grant said, casually cutting into his turkey. I was talking to a lawyer friend of mine the other day. He said estate assets like Dad's collection might technically still be joint property since there was no official probate filing. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. I told you before Dad left the coins to me. In writing. He smiled. Yeah, but unless it was notarized, it's not binding. My mother chimed in, dabbing her lips with a napkin. Your brother's right, dear. It's not about taking from you, it's about being fair. You're not the only one who loved your father. I set my fork down. Fair? My voice trembled slightly, but I held my tone steady. You took everything else. His car, his tools, the furniture. All I kept was the coin chest. And now you want that too? Lydia's eyes darted between us nervously. Can we not do this at dinner? She muttered. Grant ignored her. You're missing the point, Dee. That collection belongs to all of us. And if you were smart, you'd cash out and split it. You could get hundreds of thousands, maybe even more. My mother's voice softened into something sickly sweet. You could buy a house, darling, start fresh. Wouldn't that be nice? I stared at her, disbelief clawing at my throat. You mean you could buy a house? Let me guess, you've already figured out how to divide it? Grant leaned back in his chair, smirking. You're so paranoid. We're family. No, I said coldly. You're scavengers. The word hung in the air like a slap. My mother gasped softly. Delilah. But I didn't stop. Dad would be disgusted if he could see what you've become. You never cared about his collection when he was alive. Why start now? Grant slammed his fist on the table, rattling the dishes. Because now it's worth something. The outburst stunned everyone. Lydia flinched. My mother went silent, and I just stared at him. There it was, the truth, stripped bare. I stood slowly, my voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the silence. Get out. Grant laughed bitterly. You can't kick us out of Dad's house. This isn't Dad's house, I snapped. It's mine. Everything you're sitting in right now, I pay for. The coins? Mine. The table you're shouting over? Mine. You don't get to walk in here and act like you own me. Lydia rose from her chair, her voice shaking. Grant, let's just go. But he wasn't done. You think you're better than us because Dad spoiled you, but you're nothing, Delilah. You wouldn't even have that collection if he hadn't died. The words hit like a punch. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then something inside me broke open. You're right, I said quietly. He's gone. And he left behind 3 children, 1 who honors him, and 2 who only remember what they can take. Grant sneered. Keep talking. You'll regret it when the lawyers get involved. Then I'll see you in court, I said, meeting his glare. But until then, get out of my home. He hesitated, as if weighing whether to push it further. Then Lydia grabbed his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. He pulled free but finally stepped back. My mother stood last, shaking her head in disappointment. I don't know what's happened to you, Delilah. You used to be so sweet. I forced a bitter smile. I stopped confusing silence with kindness. She sighed dramatically. You'll regret this. They left without another word, the door slamming. Behind them, I stood in the silence that followed, staring at the table, a battlefield of half-eaten food and broken family ties. My hands were trembling, but not from fear this time. From rage. It was over. The illusion of family, the hope of peace, it all shattered that night. As I began clearing the plates, one thought echoed in my mind. They'd come for the coins, but what they really wanted was control. And I had just proven I wouldn't give it to them. I looked out the window at the darkening sky, the city lights flickering in the distance, and whispered to the empty room, You were right, Dad. People show their true value when they think they're owed something. That night, the fight wasn't just about money, it was about power. And for the first time, I realized I was done being the quiet one. The next morning, the smell of cold turkey and broken trust still lingered in the air. I woke up with a dull ache behind my eyes, the kind that comes from crying too long and sleeping too little. My apartment felt emptier than ever, not because they had taken anything, but because they had left their poison behind. Every room still echoed with their voices. Every corner felt invaded. I made coffee, but the bitter taste only made my stomach turn. My phone sat on the counter, silent, until a single text buzzed in. It was from Lydia. Lydia. You didn't have to make it so ugly. Grant's furious. Mom's heartbroken. Maybe if you'd been less defensive. Less defensive. The words made my jaw tighten. I didn't reply. There was no point. Lydia had always been the family peacekeeper, the one who tried to smooth things over, even when smoothing meant siding with whoever yelled the loudest. I looked around my kitchen, still half set from last night's disaster. The wine glasses, untouched. The candles, burned down to waxy stubs. The the turkey, cold and gray in the pan. I thought about throwing everything away, but something in me wanted to keep it like that for a while as evidence. Proof that peace, in my family, was always just the quiet moment before another betrayal. Around noon, there was a soft knock at my door. For a moment, my stomach dropped. Grant again, I thought. Maybe back for another fight. But when I peered through the peephole, it wasn't him. It was Mr. Rhodes. I blinked in surprise before opening the door. Mr. Rhodes? What are you doing here? He smiled kindly, though his eyes were serious. You didn't answer my calls this morning. I wanted to check on you. Oh, I said softly. Sorry. It's been a lot. He nodded, stepping inside when I gestured for him to enter. I heard from my colleague Aaron that someone's been asking questions about your collection. Apparently, a man claiming to be your brother called the appraiser's office yesterday, demanding information. I froze. Grant. Most likely. We told him nothing, of course. But it's clear they're getting more aggressive. I sank into a chair, rubbing my temples. They showed up last night, at Thanksgiving. They didn't even try to hide it, they came for the coins. Mr. Rhodes exhaled, his expression tightening. Then it's time we make this official. You need to document ownership. If they decide to take legal action, you'll be protected. I looked up. You think they would really do that? He hesitated. You said yourself they've already tried intimidation. The next step is usually paperwork. I felt my chest tighten. The idea of my own siblings dragging me into court made my stomach turn. But as the hours passed, fear turned into something colder: resolve. I wasn't going to let them twist my father's legacy into a lawsuit. While Mr. Rhodes drafted a formal certification letter for my records, I found myself staring at the framed photo of my father on the bookshelf. It was taken years ago. During one of his coin fairs, he was smiling, holding up a small silver piece between his fingers. I'd never noticed before how proud he looked. He hadn't collected coins for money. He'd collected them because each one told a story of endurance. Coins outlasted empires, wars, even betrayal. Maybe he'd known I'd need that lesson someday. Miss Moore, Mr. Rhodes said gently, breaking my thoughts. Are you certain you wish to keep them? You could sell just one coin, enough to secure yourself financially. It wouldn't dishonor your father. I shook my head. Not yet. It's not about money anymore. It's about principle. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Then let's protect your principle properly. We spent the next few hours reviewing the appraisal details and documenting the provenance of each piece: the double eagle, the Confederate cent, the draped bust dollar. He helped me photograph everything, logging serial numbers and condition reports. By the time we finished, the tension in my shoulders had loosened slightly. But when he left, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No stamp. No handwriting on the front, just my name, typed in bold letters. My heartbeat quickened. I picked it up cautiously, half expecting some kind of threat. When I opened it, my worst fear was confirmed. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a notice of intent to pursue legal action. At the bottom, in messy blue ink, was my brother's signature, Grant Moore. My hand trembled as I read the letter. The wording was sharp and rehearsed, clearly written by someone he'd paid to sound professional. We, the undersigned, hereby notify you of our intent to seek rightful division of the Edward Moore estate, including but not limited to coin assets currently withheld by the defendant, Delilah Moore. Defendant, the word made my blood run cold. I sat down slowly, the letter trembling in my hands. It wasn't even a real court filing yet, just a warning. But the intent was clear. They weren't going to stop. An image flashed in my mind, Grant slamming his fist on my dining table, yelling that it belonged to all of us. His words echoed now like prophecy. That night, I barely ate. I just sat on the couch with the letter beside me, staring at the TV without hearing a word of it. I thought about calling my mother, but I knew she'd side with him. She always had. She'd talk about family fairness and compromise. all while letting Grant and Lydia take whatever they wanted. By midnight, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let them drag me through the mud. If they wanted to make this public, I'd make sure the world knew why. The next morning, I called Aaron Wells, the insurance specialist, and asked him if he could help me organize a formal evaluation event. Something public, something undeniable. He hesitated at first. Public exposure can attract attention. Miss Moore, good and bad. I know, I said quietly. But I need to end this before it begins. He agreed, promising to reach out to a few museum contacts who occasionally hosted televised appraisal showcases. After hanging up, I sat in silence, staring at the faint morning light filtering through the blinds. The thought of putting my father's collection under a camera made me uneasy, but so did letting my family rewrite history. Maybe this was what my father had meant when he told me once. Every collection tells a story. It's up to you whether it ends with greed or grace. When I looked at the letter again, something inside me hardened. Grant wanted a fight? Fine, he'd get one. But it wouldn't be behind closed doors this time. It would be out in the open, with the truth for everyone to see. I picked up my father's notebook from the shelf, tracing the faded handwriting on the first page. Legacy is greater than value. It wasn't about coins anymore. It was about who he had raised me to be. And if my family wanted to drag his name through the dirt, I'd make sure they learned the hard way. That my father's greatest treasure wasn't sitting in a chest, it was living in me. After the feast came the truth. They didn't just want his collection. They wanted to own my silence. And I was finally ready to break it. The day of the public appraisal arrived faster than I expected. It was held in a small exhibition hall downtown, the kind used for local art shows and antique fairs. Rows of tables lined the room, each covered in soft gray cloth under warm lighting. Cameras and microphones were scattered around news crews, documentary filmmakers, collectors, all buzzing with that electric curiosity that comes when someone whispers the word fortune. And somewhere in that crowd, I knew my family was watching. I hadn't told them about the event, but I didn't have to. Word had spread on social media days earlier, thanks to the museum's post. A rare private coin collection, unseen for decades, to be unveiled this weekend. They'd recognize it immediately. I knew they would, and part of me wanted them to. That morning I'd barely eaten. My stomach was a knot of nerves and fury. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to prove the truth, to end the years of mockery, the greed, the constant accusations. When I arrived, Mr. Rhodes was already there, his calm presence grounding me like always. "You ready?" he asked gently. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure. As ready as I'll ever be. Beside him stood Aaron Wells, the insurance specialist, along with a small team from the Historical Society. Together, they began unpacking the trays of coins, each one glinting softly under the exhibition lights. Watching them handle my father's collection felt surreal. For years, these coins had been just ours, his and mine. Now they were being admired by strangers, discussed by professionals, valued by experts. When the first appraiser stepped forward, a woman named Dr. Noreen Chu, a leading numismatist, she studied the coins with reverence, her gloved hands careful and deliberate. "I've seen some remarkable collections in my career," she said slowly. "But this is extraordinary." Her words rippled through the room like a spark. Cameras clicked. People murmured. She continued. "These pieces span centuries of history, from the Roman Republic to early American currency. The craftsmanship, the preservation, and this," she held up the 1933 double eagle carefully between her fingers. "This coin is one of the rarest in existence." The crowd leaned closer. "Estimated value?" someone from the audience called out. She smiled faintly. "Given its authenticity and provenance, potentially upward of $1 million, perhaps more, if auctioned internationally." The sound that filled the hall wasn't just surprise, it was awe. And in that instant, every sneer, every insult, every joke my family had ever made about those useless coins vanished in the echo of her words. $1 million. I felt my knees go weak, my breath catch. My father's quiet obsession, his dusty weekends spent cataloging and labeling, wasn't madness, it was brilliance. But as I stood there, blinking back tears, a commotion stirred near the back of the room. I didn't even have to turn to know who it was. Grant. He was storming through the crowd, Lydia trailing behind him, looking mortified. My mother wasn't far behind either, her expression a mixture of shock and fury. They pushed their way to the front, ignoring the glares from the staff. "What the hell is this?" Grant barked, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the crowd. I felt every eye turn toward us. Mr. Rhodes stepped forward immediately. "Sir, you need to lower your voice. This is a professional event." Grant ignored him. "You stole this collection!" he shouted, pointing at me. "These were our father's coins, our inheritance. You had no right to parade them around like this." Lydia whispered, "Grant, please stop." But he wasn't listening. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stand tall. "They were Dad's," I said evenly. "And he left them to me. You know that." He laughed a bitter, mocking sound. "Left them to you? There was no official will, Delilah." "You forged that story to keep us out," Mr. Rhodes interjected firmly. "There was a will. I've seen the documents myself." Grant's face turned red. "And who are you? Some greedy dealer trying to take a cut?" The room murmured in disapproval, but he didn't care. He turned back to me, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you're smart, don't you? Standing here with your cameras and your little moment of fame. But this isn't over. You've embarrassed this family." I met his glare head on. "No, Grant. I revealed this family. There's a difference." Lydia tugged at his sleeve, whispering something frantically. But he shoved her off. My mother finally spoke then, her voice icy. "You've gone too far, Delilah. Airing our private business in front of strangers? How dare you?" I turned to face her fully. "Private business? You mean the inheritance you all tried to bully me out of? The one you mocked Dad for collecting?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "We were only trying to make things fair." "Fair," I repeated bitterly. "You took everything else. The car, the furniture, the tools. You stripped that house bare. And now you want to pretend this was about fairness? Watch your tone," she snapped. "You're making a fool of yourself." "No," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "I'm finally telling the truth." The cameras were rolling. The crowd was silent. For once, I wasn't hiding. Dr. Chu cleared her throat gently. "If I may," she said, glancing between us. "The legal documentation clearly states the collection belongs to Miss Moore. She has every right to display it. There's nothing fraudulent about this." Grant's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked around, realizing that the room wasn't on his side anymore. People were staring not at me with judgment, but at him with disgust. For the first time in his life, Grant Moore was being seen for who he truly was: greedy, petty, and transparent. Lydia looked at me, then really looked. Her face softened just a little, like she was finally seeing the situation for what it was. My mother, however, turned away, her pride too thick to let humility in. Grant muttered something under his breath and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. My mother followed, stiff and silent. Only Lydia lingered, her eyes full of tears she didn't quite let fall. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought you were exaggerating." I nodded, my throat tight. "Now you know." She hesitated, then turned and left without another word. When the doors finally closed, the room seemed to exhale all at once. People began whispering again about the coins, the family drama, the fortune revealed. But I didn't care about any of that anymore. Mr. Rhodes rested a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "You let the truth speak for itself." I nodded slowly, staring at the gleaming coins on the table. They shimmered under the light, almost like they were alive, like they knew the justice they'd just witnessed. For years, my family had laughed at my father's useless coins. They'd mocked him, mocked me. But now, those same coins had done what I never could. They'd exposed the greed that had rotted my family from the inside out. Still, the victory didn't feel sweet. It felt hollow, heavy, like justice rarely comes without a cost. As I left the building that day, reporters shouting questions behind me, one thought echoed through my mind: shock, denial, rage. That's what they felt today. But tomorrow? Tomorrow they'd feel the weight of regret. After the chaos of the appraisal, I expected things to calm down. They didn't. If anything, the silence that followed was worse than the shouting. It was the kind of silence that hums beneath your skin, heavy with unfinished battles and unspoken resentment. The day after the event, my phone lit up nonstop reporters wanting statements, strangers congratulating me, collectors asking to buy pieces of the collection. It was overwhelming. My name, Delilah Moore, had suddenly become synonymous with scandal and inheritance drama. But the noise wasn't what bothered me most. What bothered me was the emptiness inside my home. That apartment, once my safe space, now felt tainted. Every time I looked at my front door, I remembered Grant standing there, shouting accusations. I remembered Lydia's teary eyes. I remembered my mother's cold stare, dripping with disappointment. So, I did something that surprised even me. I decided to move. It wasn't impulsive. It was inevitable. I needed distance, physical, emotional, and spiritual. I needed to step out of the shadow of the family that had made my father's love feel like a crime. I started small. I listed furniture for sale online, packed boxes at night while soft jazz played in the background, my father's favorite music. I told myself it was practical, but deep down, I knew it was symbolic. Every item I packed felt like peeling away another layer of pain. By the third week, the apartment looked hollow. Bare walls, echoing rooms, and just a few boxes stacked neatly by the door. I should have felt free. But instead, I felt haunted. That's when Lydia showed up. It was a gray Thursday morning. I was labeling boxes when I heard the knock. My stomach dropped, my body still reacted like prey hearing a predator. But when I looked through the peephole, it wasn't Grant. Lydia stood there, holding a paper bag of coffee and muffins, her expression timid. I hesitated, then opened the door just enough to see her face clearly. I let out a shaky breath. "To talk. Please." For a long moment, I said nothing. Then, reluctantly, I stepped aside. She entered slowly, her eyes scanning the half-empty room. "You're moving?" "Yes." "Where?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere quiet." She nodded, setting the coffee down on the counter. "You're angry. I get it. I would be too." I crossed my arms. "Angry doesn't even begin to cover it." She winced. "I'm not here to defend what happened. I didn't know. I didn't believe you when you said the collection was yours. I thought you were exaggerating." "Grant told you that, didn't he?" She nodded. "He said you were lying, said Dad's will was fake." I laughed bitterly. "Of course he did. He's always been good at rewriting history." Lydia's eyes welled with tears. "Delilah, I'm sorry. For all of it. For not standing up for you. For letting him—" She stopped, biting her lip. "You didn't deserve that." For the first time in a long while, I saw her not as my rival or my mother's echo, but as my sister, the same girl who used to sneak cookies with me after bedtime, who once held my hand when Dad got sick. I sighed. "It's too late for sorry, Lydia. You should have believed me before the cameras." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know, I just didn't realize how far he'd go. Mom either." "Mom?" I repeated, incredulous. "She encouraged him." "She regrets it now," Lydia said softly. "She won't say it, but I can tell." I wanted to believe her. But forgiveness isn't something that comes easy once you've seen how ugly people can get when money's involved. We stood in silence for a moment before Lydia spoke again. "So, what happens now? With the collection?" I glanced toward the box in the corner where my father's notebook Saturday. "It's safe. That's all that matters." She nodded. "You're not selling it?" "No. Not now. Maybe not ever. Dad didn't build it for profit. He built it for legacy. Lydia smiled faintly through her tears. You really are his daughter. I looked down, feeling that familiar lump rise in my throat. I wish he could have seen this, how it all turned out. He would have been proud, she said quietly. For the first time, I believed her. When she left an hour later, I felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because something inside me had finally settled. Closure, maybe. Or the closest thing I'd ever get to it. That night, I stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline. The lights flickered like stars trying to break through clouds. I thought about my father's words. History lives in small things. He was right. History lived in the coins, yes, but it also lived in choices. In boundaries. In the courage to walk away. 2 days later, I loaded the last of my boxes into a moving van. The driver, a quiet man with kind eyes, asked, "You leaving for good?" I looked up at the building one last time. "Yeah. For good." He nodded and closed the van doors. As we drove away, I watched the city fade in the rearview mirror, the skyline shrinking, the noise dissolving into distance. I felt something break loose in my chest, something that had been caged for years. Freedom. When I arrived at my new place, a small cottage on the outskirts of town, I knew immediately it was right. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful. There were trees, open air, and quiet nights filled only with the sound of crickets. I set the oak coin chest in the corner of my new living room, beneath the window where sunlight pooled in the mornings. Then I placed my father's photo above it. "This is home now, Dad," I whispered. The next few weeks were simple, quiet, beautiful. I got a part-time job at a local museum, helping catalog small exhibits. Mr. Rhodes visited once to check on me, bringing coffee and updates on the growing interest in my father's collection. "You've become quite the local legend," he said, smiling. I laughed softly. "I'd rather be known for peace than fame." He nodded approvingly. "Then you're already richer than most." And maybe, for the first time, I believed that. I still had nightmares sometimes, Grant's voice. My mother's disappointment, but they faded a little more each week. I learned to sit with my coffee in the morning without flinching when my phone buzzed. I learned to breathe again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I opened the oak chest once more. The coins gleamed in the soft orange light, whispering their stories. I traced my father's handwriting on the labels and smiled. He'd left me far more than wealth. He'd left me wisdom, the kind that only pain can reveal. I closed the lid gently and whispered, "I'm moving on, Dad. But I'll never move away from what you taught me." And as the light faded, I realized something simple but profound. Sometimes, the only way to honor the past is to stop living inside it. I wasn't running anymore. I was rebuilding, and for the first time, my future felt like mine alone. Time has a strange way of healing things, not by erasing them, but by softening the edges. By the time spring arrived, it had been nearly 6 months since I'd moved into my small cottage outside of town. 6 months since I'd last seen my family. 6 months since the truth about my father's collection had burst into the world like a secret too powerful to stay buried. Life had quieted. I spent my mornings walking along the tree-lined path behind my house, coffee in hand, listening to the birds instead of my phone. The museum job suited me. It was peaceful, purposeful. I was surrounded by history, just like my father had been, and every day I felt a little closer to understanding him. But some nights, when the wind rattled the windows or the rain tapped against the roof, I still thought of my family. I wondered if they hated me, pitied me, or maybe, just maybe, understood me at last. The answer came sooner than I expected. It was a Sunday afternoon when I found the letter in my mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, slanted and looped, the way only Lydia wrote. For a long moment, I just stood there on the porch, staring at the envelope. Then I took it inside, made a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table before opening it. The first line made my breath catch. "I'm sorry." It wasn't long, just 2 pages. But every word hit like a slow wave. She wrote about the guilt that had been eating at her since that day at the appraisal. How she'd watched Grant unravel in front of everyone and realized that greed had destroyed them. How she'd spent months replaying our last conversation, the one in my half-packed apartment, and realized that, for the first time in her life, she had chosen silence over truth. "You were right about everything, Delilah," she wrote. "Dad left the collection to you because you were the only one who saw its meaning. We saw money, you saw him. I think he always knew that." I had to stop reading for a minute because my eyes had blurred with tears. She ended the letter simply, "Grant isn't the same anymore. He's ashamed, though he'll never admit it. Mom doesn't talk about it, but she watches the museum interviews on TV sometimes. I think, deep down, she's proud. We all are. I just wanted you to know that." When I finished reading, I pressed the paper to my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was the closest thing to peace we'd ever had. A week later, the phone rang. When I saw my mother's name on the screen, I froze. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in me whispered, "Answer." "Hello?" There was a pause. Then her voice, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Delilah? Hi, Mom. I wasn't sure you'd pick up." I almost didn't. A dry laugh escaped. I deserve that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear her breathing steady, nervous. Then she said, "I saw the museum segment, the one about your father's collection. They showed your photo next to his. You look so much like him." My throat tightened. "He'd probably laugh if he saw it." "He'd be proud," she said quietly. "He'd say you did right by him." I didn't know what to say. For years, I dreamed of hearing those words not from her, but from him. Hearing them now, even borrowed, made my eyes sting. She continued, "I owe you an apology." I froze. "What?" "For everything," she said, her voice trembling. "For not standing up for you, for choosing sides when I should have been a mother to all of you. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was just avoiding the truth." I swallowed hard. "You hurt me, Mom. All of you did." "I know," she said softly. "And I can't take that back. But I'd like to try to make things right. If you'll let me." I closed my eyes. The bitterness I'd carried for so long felt heavy in that moment, like an anchor I was tired of holding. "I don't know if I can forget," I said finally. "I'm not asking you to forget," she replied. "Just maybe come by for dinner one night. No fighting, no talk of coins, just us." For a moment, I could almost picture it. The table, the laughter, the fragile attempt at normalcy. And though a part of me wanted to stay guarded, another part, the part my father had raised to see, meaning even in broken things, wanted to try. "I'll think about it," I said softly. "That's all I ask." When we hung up, I sat for a long time, staring at my father's photo on the wall. "Did you hear that, Dad?" I whispered. "They're finally starting to understand." That night, I pulled out his notebook again. I hadn't opened it in months, afraid it would reopen old wounds. But this time, the words didn't hurt, they healed. On one of the back pages, I noticed something I'd missed before, scrawled in faded ink. "Value is not in possession, it's in preservation. One day, you'll see." I smiled through tears. He'd been right all along. It wasn't about the coins or their worth. It wasn't about ownership. It was about preserving something honest in a world that often traded love for greed. In the weeks that followed, small things started to change. Lydia began volunteering at the museum on weekends, helping catalog exhibits. We didn't talk about the past, but sometimes, when our eyes met across the room, I saw understanding there, a quiet, mutual forgiveness. Grant never apologized, not directly. But one afternoon, I received a small envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single coin, a tarnished silver quarter I recognized immediately. It had been one of Dad's least valuable pieces, but also his favorite. The one Grant used to flick across the table as a kid, laughing while Dad pretended to scold him. There was a note attached. "This belongs with the rest. G." I smiled. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. My mother kept her word too. She called every few weeks, her voice cautious but warmer than I remembered. Eventually, I did go to dinner once, then twice. There were awkward silences, yes, but also small bursts of laughter that felt almost genuine. It wasn't perfect, but neither was life, and maybe that was okay. One evening, after one of those dinners, I came home to my cottage, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. The coin chest gleamed faintly in the corner, bathed in silver moonlight. For the first time, I didn't see it as a symbol of pain or power. I saw it for what it truly was, a reminder. A reminder that sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones fought for dignity. That love can survive betrayal if you let time soften it. And that truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds it the way through. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I whispered to the darkness, "They finally understand, Dad. You were right about everything." And I could almost hear him say back, with that soft chuckle I missed so much, "Took them long enough." They had laughed, they had fought, they had tried to take, but in the end, they learned that what's truly valuable can't be stolen, only seen. Last Thanksgiving, my family tore itself apart at my dinner table. This year, I planned to spend the holiday differently, quietly, peacefully, and on my own terms. The week leading up to it, the air in my little town turned crisp and golden. The trees outside my cottage looked like they were on fire, every leaf burning in shades of amber and rust. The grocery stores filled with families grabbing turkeys and pies, laughter echoing down the aisles. And while a part of me felt a pang of nostalgia, most of me felt relief. I didn't have to force anything this year. No fake smiles, no walking on eggshells, no pretending that love and resentment could share the same table. This year, Thanksgiving was going to mean something else entirely. I woke up that morning to the sound of rain against the window, a soft, steady drizzle that made the world outside feel calm and distant. I brewed my favorite coffee, wrapped myself in my father's old flannel shirt, and lit the cinnamon candle I'd bought a few days earlier. The simple scent filled the cottage with warmth. Instead of a feast for many, I prepared a meal for one, a roasted chicken instead of turkey, sweet potatoes, green beans sautéed with garlic, and one small pumpkin pie. It wasn't much, but it felt right, like honoring the spirit of the day without reopening old wounds. As the chicken roasted, I set the table, not fancy, just one plate, one glass, one folded napkin. And beside my plate, I placed one of my father's coins, a silver $50 from 1945. It wasn't the rarest coin he'd owned, but it had always been my favorite. He used to carry it in his pocket for luck, he'd said. When I was little, he'd hand it to me before every school play, every test, every big moment, whispering, "For courage, sweetheart." That coin had followed me through every storm since then. And now, it would sit on my table as a quiet guest of honor. By the time I sat down to eat, the rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and clean. I took my first bite slowly, savoring the peace that had replaced the chaos. I thought of last year's Thanksgiving, the yelling, the accusations, the heartbreak, and I realized how far I'd come. This was the first Thanksgiving I'd had in years that didn't taste like tension. After dinner, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the fog roll through the trees. The quiet hum of the heater was the only sound in the room. For once, silence didn't feel lonely, it felt sacred. Still, as much as I cherished the solitude, a small part of me wondered what my family was doing. Were they sitting together, pretending last year never happened? Or had they splintered off completely, each celebrating in their own corners of guilt and regret? I didn't want to know. Not really. But curiosity is a hard thing to silence. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was a message from Lydia. "Lydia, happy Thanksgiving, Delilah. I hope you're doing okay." Simple, polite. But the weight of it hit me like a wave. I stared at the words for a long time before replying. "Me? I'm doing fine. I hope you are too." She responded a minute later. "Lydia. We're at Mom's. It's quiet this year. She made your favorite stuffing." She said she misses you. I felt something twist in my chest. Old wounds, half-healed, tugging at their stitches. Me. Tell her I said thank you. Another pause. Lydia, maybe next year you could come? No expectations. Just dinner. I didn't respond. Right away. I looked at the coin on the table, the one my father had carried for luck, and thought about what he'd say if he were here. He'd tell me that love is complicated, that forgiveness isn't a single act but a series of choices. He'd remind me that holding on to bitterness is like trying to keep a flame alive in your hand, you only burn yourself. Finally, I typed back. Me, we'll see. I'm not ready yet. Lydia, that's okay. We'll be here when you are. I smiled. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was something softer than anger, something almost like hope. I put my phone down and poured another glass of wine. Outside, the rain began again, tapping lightly against the glass, steady and familiar. In that sound, I heard my father's voice. You did good, sweetheart. You found peace. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, I'm trying, Dad. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering gold across my living room. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee, feeling the cool earth beneath my feet. The world was clean, quiet, reborn. As I sipped, I thought about how Thanksgiving used to be a battlefield of expectation, proof of who was winning the invisible war of family loyalty. But this year, it had been something else. A moment of gratitude without performance. Gratitude for solitude, for strength, for the ability to walk away from noise and find peace in quiet places. Later that day, I sat at my desk and began writing something I hadn't done since before the appraisal. It wasn't a letter or a journal entry. It was a story. My story. About my father, his coins, and the legacy they carried. I didn't plan to publish it. It wasn't for anyone else. It was for me and for him. When I finished, I placed the pages inside my father's oak chest, tucked between the coin trays. A continuation of the legacy, written not in metal, but in memory. That evening, as I watched the sunset through my window, the sky painted itself in shades of orange and rose. I lifted the coin from the table, rubbed it between my fingers, and smiled. I'm thankful, I whispered. For all of it, the love, the pain, the lessons. The wind rustled through the trees outside, almost like an answer. And for the first time in my life, I felt what Thanksgiving was truly meant to be, not a performance, not an obligation, but a pause. A moment to look at where you've been, who you've become, and who you're finally ready to forgive. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, I closed my eyes and let out a breath I'd been holding for years. This was my Thanksgiving, simple, quiet, mine. And for the first time, peace finally took its seat at my table. People think a house is just walls and wood and nails, but mine was a teacher. Every room, every echo, every argument inside it had a lesson to give. It was almost a year after the Thanksgiving I'd spent alone when I decided to drive back to the old neighborhood. I didn't plan it, not really. I just woke up one Saturday with a restlessness that wouldn't leave me. The kind that whispers, go see it again. The place where everything started. The drive there was quiet. The world looked softer somehow, less like a battlefield, more like a memory. When I turned down the familiar street, my heart gave a strange little twist. There it was. My father's house. Only, it wasn't ours anymore. The new owners had painted the siding pale yellow, planted rose bushes out front, and hung a small wind chime on the porch. A red bicycle leaned against the railing small, with training wheels. There were potted herbs on the steps and children's drawings taped to the windows. It looked alive. Happy. I parked across the street and sat for a while, just watching. The same porch where my father used to sit on summer nights was now strung with fairy lights. The same garden he used to weed in silence was bursting with marigolds and lavender. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. If anything, it was comforting to know the house was finally what he'd wanted it to be, filled with life, laughter, and warmth. Not arguments over furniture or inheritances, not the sound of bitterness echoing through the halls. After a few minutes, I stepped out of my car and walked to the sidewalk. I wasn't sure why, maybe just to stand a little closer, maybe to say goodbye properly. As I stood there, the front door opened. A woman came out mid-30s, smiling, her hands dusted with flour. A little boy darted out behind her, laughing, a toy car clutched in his small hand. "Sorry," she said when she noticed me. "You okay?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, I'm fine. I used to live here a long time ago." Her expression softened. "Oh, really? That's so nice. We love this house. It has such good energy." "It always did." She hesitated, then said, "Would you like to come in? Just for a minute? If you used to live here, I'm sure you'd like to see it again." Something in her voice was kind and genuine, and before I could overthink it, I said yes. Walking through the doorway felt surreal. The floors had been refinished, the walls repainted, but the bones of the place were the same. The sunlight still fell through the front windows the same way it always had, golden, soft, forgiving. "This was the living room, right?" she asked, leading me in. "We turned that corner into a reading nook." I smiled. "Yes, my dad used to sit right there with his records." She glanced around. "It's funny sometimes we hear faint humming in the evenings. My husband swears it's the pipes, but I like to think it's the house remembering old music." The words made my chest tighten in the sweetest way. "It probably is," I said softly. She led me through the kitchen next. It had been remodeled, new cabinets, shiny appliances, but I could still picture my father at the counter, polishing a coin under the warm yellow light. When we reached the back door, I looked out into the yard. The oak tree was still there, older now, thicker around the trunk. I remembered the swing my father had once tied there for me. I could almost hear the rope creak and his voice saying, "Hold on tight, sweetheart." I swallowed hard. The woman must have sensed the emotion behind my silence because she said gently, "He must have loved this place." "He did," I said. "He poured his whole heart into it, every nail, every shelf, even the garden." She smiled. "Well, he built it right. We're raising our family here now. It's got a lot of love in it still." We stood there quietly for a few moments, and then I thanked her and said goodbye. When I walked back to my car, the boy waved from the porch. "Bye, lady." I waved back. "Bye, kiddo." Driving away, I felt something inside me shift. For so long, I'd tied my pain to that house. It had been the place where I'd watched love turn to greed, where laughter became arguments, where family fractured beyond repair. But now, standing in front of it again, I realized something simple. The house wasn't the problem. It was just a witness. The people inside it had changed, but the house had always stayed pure. It had absorbed every memory, every secret, and still had the grace to open itself to someone new. Maybe I could do that too. That night, back in my little cottage, I took out my father's coin chest and opened it slowly. The coins gleamed under the lamplight, each one carrying a story. I picked up the one he'd labeled, "For Delilah, She Listens." I smiled. "I'm still listening, Dad." Then I pulled out a fresh notebook from my drawer and began writing. Not the story of betrayal or lawsuits or money, but the story of us. Of how one man's quiet passion taught his daughter to value meaning over material things. As the words flowed, I realized this was my true inheritance, the wisdom, not the wealth. Weeks later, I decided to visit the museum again. They'd kept part of my father's collection on display, naming the section, "The Edward Moore Legacy." The plaque beside it read, "A collection is not about ownership, it's about preservation. Every coin tells a story, but together, they tell a legacy." I stood there, reading those words, my reflection mirrored in the glass beside the coins. In that reflection, I didn't see the broken woman who'd once been laughed at by her own family. I saw a survivor, a protector of something far greater than wealth. A few visitors walked by, admiring the display. One of them, a young boy holding his father's hand, pointed to the coins and whispered, "Dad, I want to collect like that someday." His father smiled. "Then we'll start small, son, maybe with a penny." I turned away before they could see the tears in my eyes. My father would have loved that moment. That night, I returned home and stepped out onto my porch. The moon was high, silver and soft, lighting up the forest around me. I held one of the coins in my palm and whispered, "You were right, Dad. It wasn't about the collection. It was about what it made me see." The coin caught the moonlight, glinting like a tiny star. The house behind me creaked softly in the wind, as if it, too, was alive listening. Remembering. And I understood then that home wasn't a place you inherited or bought. It was something you carried inside you. Every lesson, every heartbreak, every moment of forgiveness, they were the bricks and mortar of my true house. The one my father built in me. I turned back toward the door, the warmth from the lights spilling out across the porch. My new house. My new life. My new peace. The house I'd left behind had taught me everything: how to love, how to lose, how to let go, and in doing so, it finally led me home.